Well, folks, I must confess, I done goofed. I flew too close to the sun. I wanted to be a contrarian. I wanted to be on the record about it. And I wanted to do it before the Acolyte episode 3 came out and, completely poisoned me against the show because I knew that was going to happen. So I wanted to come out and try and give, my honest impressions of the first 2 episodes and say, while they were bad, they were not the worst thing I had ever seen. And I have to admit, the curse of the Acolyte got me. The show was so bad that trying to give it the most mild of defense destroyed my computer. I don't know if it was the Acolyte itself, the curse, the demon that possesses the show, which attacked my computer, or if my computer simply self-immolated to prevent me from posting such cringe. Because it was, I believe, the day that the Acolyte episode 3, maybe it was the day after it aired because I went to watch it, because don't they put them up at like midnight or something? So I went to go and try and watch the Acolyte episode 3 to keep up with all the cringe, because I had to see it, heard so much hype about how terrible this was. And I watched it on my iPad. And then I went to, turn on my computer and see what was going on for the day, maybe upload a video or something. And I got nothing but a black screen. This was immediately after watching the Acolyte episode 3. That's how bad it was. Now, I didn't watch it on my computer, but I did watch it in close proximity to my computer. I was in the same room. And I think that perhaps the poor little Lenovo P520 was afraid that I would praise this terrible episode. Of course, they didn't talk to me first. And so it just self-destructed. And the motherboard died. Which, for those of you who have ever had a motherboard die, it's not always immediately clear that that's what it was. It took me a couple days of troubleshooting before I came to the conclusion that it was my motherboard, because at first, you just turn on the computer, and I was getting the Lenovo splash screen, and then I was getting a black screen when I would try and boot into Windows. I don't want to make this too technical. And so I tried all sorts of things, tried replacing the graphics card, I tried reinstalling Windows. I think I tried taking out sticks of RAM, although that didn't. Actually, no, I didn't, because it posted just fine, because this has a PC speaker, and so it beeps when it posts, so I knew that it wasn't a RAM issue. But anyway, no matter how many things I took and I changed out of the system, I was just still getting the same problem, and then I was getting more problems. The problems were getting worse, and so I came to the conclusion, okay, this is the motherboard dying. It's not quite dead, but it's almost dead, and it seemed to be that it was when I would install display drivers. This is why it was sort of, the graphics card was a bit of a red herring. I'd install display drivers, and then I'd get a black screen. Like, Windows would reinstall correctly, and then you get into it, install display drivers, boom, black screen immediately. And so what I believe that symptom was, it was the PCIe slot failing. And it was functioning okay for a basic display driver, but it could not handle operating with the NVIDIA drivers installed. And that was confirmed yesterday when I finally got in all my parts to build a new PC, and I took the old graphics card, because I did not think that was the issue, put it in the new PC, and stuck my old SSD in the new PC, and everything works just fine. So yeah, the motherboard died. Very sad. It was all proprietary stuff, so I couldn't reuse anything, because it was a Lenovo, desktop tower. I bought it last year. You could find them really good deals on them, and they just had, it has tons of PCIe slots, and it has two M.2 slots. It has eight DIMM slots for quad channel RAM. But considering it's proprietary stuff, I'm not going to replace the motherboard in something like that, because if something else fails that's proprietary, like the power supply slots directly into the motherboard. I can't even reuse the power supply, which sucks. It's a 900 watt power supply. It's really cool. I mean, I forgive me, I'm in mourning. But my new PC is much better. I've made the jump to AM5, and hopefully not even the Acolyte can kill this one. So you know what? I've already gone 5 minutes on this. Why don't I just make this video PC talk? I picked the cheapest AM5 components I could get. I figured we're well enough into the life cycle of AM5. I wanted to make the jump. I didn't want to go back to DDR4 was the main thing. Because I was looking at the prices of components, and I basically would spend the same amount of money building a DDR4 AM4 system with a Ryzen 5700X 3D as I would building an AM5 DDR5 system with a Ryzen 5 7500F. And from what I could find, the two CPUs were pretty darn head-on in multi-core performance, and in single-core, of course, since the 7500F is a 6-core instead of an 8-core, it did outperform in single-core. And I always, would lean towards a CPU with better single-core performance. And in terms of all-core boost, actually, I was surprised. The 5700X 3D, which would definitely be my top choice if I were someone who already had a good working AM4 motherboard. If you weren't buying a brand new motherboard, the 5700X 3D seems like a really great value if you get it on AliExpress for $170. It's not that much worse than a 5800X 3D, and not too long ago, the 5800X 3D was, the best CPU money could buy. And so almost, the best CPU money could buy for $170. That's not a bad deal. But the all-core boost was only like 4.1 or 4.2 gigahertz, I think. I didn't look at it too closely, but where I was coming from with my 2017, I think, Skylake Xeon, it would boost all day long to 4.4 gigahertz, and it would stay there pegged, in like Cyberpunk or something at like 90% utilization, drawing like 115 or 120 watts, as long as you keep it cool, which with the old Lenovo, the Lenovo stock cooler was wildly insufficient to cool the 2135 Xeon that they had in there. I had to mod the case just to fit a decent CPU cooler in, but once I did, and it would only fit a 92 millimeter fan, you couldn't fit something like a Hyper 212. But with a dual tower 92 millimeter setup, that Xeon ran great. And considering the age, and the fact that normally workstation chips have a reputation for high core count and low clock speeds, 4.4 gigahertz, or it was like 4.39, something like that. It was pretty darn impressive, although the L3 cache I found out is what was holding it back, because it did not perform as well as I thought it should, considering the core count and the frequency, and that's when I got a crash course in what L3 cache is. And again, workstation chips, notorious for having absurd amounts of L3 cache, and for whatever reason, Intel decided when they made this generation of Xeon, the W2100s, the 2135 that I have, the 2125, the 2145, the 2155, all of those have an amount of L3 cache that back in 2017 would have been normal for like a typical, like consumer desktop. And in the case of the 2135, the 6-core variant, it only had 8 megabytes of L3 cache, which is equivalent to, a low-budget chip like a Ryzen 5 4500. So anyway, not the best chip in the world, but it served me well. And I guess the chip itself could still be salvaged out of the system. But anyway, I've moved on to bigger and better things now. I will say, though, here's a tip. If you want to build a budget AM5 system, I went the cheapest on everything, the cheapest RAM, although I got it on sale, so I was able to get a little better than I thought. The cheapest motherboard, which had not very good reviews, because I kind of wanted to put it to the test. And I did the cheapest AM5 CPU, the 7500F I already talked about. Absolutely great value at $133, although the AliExpress sale started right after I ordered it, which sucked, so I could have got it like $20 cheaper. That would have been awesome. I would have felt really good about that, but still a better deal than most people are getting on CPUs just by buying the 7500F at the regular price. It is a bit of a downside that you have to wait. I mean, that's what took me so long to get back, is I was waiting on my CPU to come from China. I could have been up and running last week, within just a couple of days, had I ordered everything on Amazon. Had I ordered a Ryzen 5 8400F, which is officially AMD's budget AM5 chip, although the 8400F is worse than the 7500F. It has half of the L3 cache. It only has 16 megabytes versus 32, and 16 megabytes is all right. It's a lot better than the 8 megabytes that I had. But I would say that, considering the pure raw power of these Zen 4 chips at 16 megabytes of L3 cache, it's probably L3 cache bottlenecked, at least in gaming. And so it should be priced accordingly, because you're not going to be able to achieve the same performance as a 7500F. You're going to achieve substantially less performance. And so at like $120 max, the 8400F would make sense, especially since you can find it available on Amazon and you don't have to order through AliExpress and get it in an unmarked box. Because AMD does not officially sell the 7500F in North America. You can't buy it commercially. You just buy it from China, from like OEMs, I guess. But it is still a genuine, AMD chip. It's just these are not intended for retail sale. But so this is just the way you have to buy them. Anyway, moving on to the RAM, I was going to get just standard 4800 megahertz DDR5 RAM, because even the lowest speed DDR5 is insanely fast compared to the average DDR4 3200. That would have been what I would have went with if I had bought a 5700X3D and stuck with an AM4 motherboard. But luckily, there was a sale. I was able to get 5600 megahertz DDR5 for the price of 4800. So that was only like $75 for 32 gigabytes, which is a pretty good price, I think. So that brings me to the lowest quality part in the entire build, which ironically is the motherboard. Now, you would think that since I just had a motherboard die, I would have went out of my way to buy a better motherboard than I needed, just to be safe, right? Wrong. I bought the MSI A620M, ME, I think, M-E, and it's like $75 on Amazon. It's $20 cheaper than the next cheapest A620 board. The A620 motherboards are already the cheap AM5 chipset. It's like the A320 was for AM4. And it does not have great reviews. It does not have a great history of compatibility. There was a lot of compatibility issues that it's had. Tech Yes City did a great review of the A620 and the MSI A620, because he was heaping a lot of praise onto other A620 motherboards, saying that they were good enough, to run high-end chips like a 7800X3D that draw more power, even though they were the cheaper chipset. Well, the MSI one, it was the opposite. This MSI board has no VRM heatsinks, and as a result, the VRM, which is the voltage regulator modules, controls the power going to your CPU, kind of important. They get really hot, up to 90 degrees under a full load, and the motherboard claims to support all AM5 CPUs, but that's not really true. First of all, you have to have a recent enough BIOS installed to support certain chips. So, for example, the earliest versions of this motherboard did not support the 7500F. Luckily, the BIOS revision to support the 7500F came out like a year ago, so I was pretty confident that it was going to work. It did. It worked just fine. But if you wanted to buy, let's say, the cheapest AM5 CPU on Amazon and pair it with the cheapest AM5 motherboard, the 8400F, and this motherboard, it wouldn't work because they haven't cleared out all of the older stock that has the old BIOS on it, and so people are buying this new 8400F CPU, and they're pairing it with this cheap A620 motherboard, and the BIOS is not updated, and so they can't even turn it on. So very annoying. But since I had the 7500F, wasn't too worried about that. It turned on just fine. Interestingly enough, in Tech Yes City's testing, what he found is that because of the lack of VRM heatsinks, the board is limited to 90 watts of power. So any CPU that draws more, that has a TDP over 90 watts, you wouldn't want to use with this board because you're going to be power throttled. You're going to be power limited to 90 watts. And so that means that there are only 3 chips that you should pair with this motherboard: the 7500F, the 7600, not the 7600X, the 7600, just the regular one, or the 8400F, or I guess the 8500G. I'm not sure how much that draws, but that might also be a 65 watt part. I wasn't looking for integrated graphics, so I was only looking at at chips that had no integrated graphics. Anyway, you want a 65 watt TDP card to use with this cheap motherboard, because even the 7500F can apparently pull up to 88 watts. And so I guess that's why they put that 90 watt cap in there. They're like, okay, it would be just enough to where we're not at all kneecapping the cheapest AM5 chips. Which I don't mind, because this is a motherboard that isn't. If you're making the cheapest motherboard, it makes sense that you are going to cut corners in order so that it at least works with the cheapest CPUs, and so you can spend the least amount of money on everything. However, they should be. It should be advertised that way. They should not be advertising this as a motherboard that you're going to buy and pair with your Ryzen 9 7950X. It's just misleading. It's inaccurate. And anyway, in Tech Yes City's testing, the VRM temps maxed out at 90 watts if you were using a tower cooler, as you might if you want to have your CPU running as cool as possible. You don't want to use the AMD stock cooler. The VRM was getting up to 90 degrees, and that was at that 90 watt limit, which is very concerning. So what he found is that if you did use a downdraft air cooler like the AMD stock Wraith Stealth cooler, the VRM temps were staying around 75. So that made sense. Okay. So all of this was adding up to me. This is the cheapest motherboard, and in order to use it properly, to run properly, you're going to want the cheapest AM5 CPU, and you're going to want the cheapest CPU cooler, the Wraith Stealth, to blow air down onto the VRM, as well as cool the CPU. Well, so I went ahead and did all that because it made sense in my head. And what I found is that while the 7500F is compatible with the MSI A620, and the RAM was compatible, and the downdraft air cooler, I assume, is cooling the VRM properly, as his testing showed. I did not try using the infrared thermometer, heat gun, laser gun on it myself. I could. But I didn't do much testing, because what I found was that the Wraith Stealth is just not enough to cool the 7500F. I guess 65 watt TDP is not what it used to be, because the older Ryzen 65 watt chips, I don't think ran this hot at all. I don't remember this. I've not used them extensively, but I've installed them in multiple computers. Every Ryzen PC I've ever built for someone else, I've used the Wraith Stealth cooler. That was, gosh, which ones have I used? They were all Ryzen 5s. I used a 2600. I used a 4500. Oh no, one of them was not a Ryzen 5. It was a Ryzen 3 4100. Anyway, they were all 65 watt TDP chips, and they all cooled just fine with the Wraith Stealth. The 7500F idles at like 46 or 47, 48, almost 50 degrees Celsius at idle. And when I tried to, I did not try Cinebench. I was not going to do that because I didn't want it to catch on fire. I tried, let's just turn on a CPU intensive game. Let's try Cyberpunk. And I saw it get, it was in the 80s. It was, average was over 80. It would dip below 80, but I don't like that. I'm not comfortable with my CPU temperatures in the 80s. And so my recommendation is, if you are doing what I'm doing, trying to build the cheapest AM5 system possible because you're budget conscious, don't use a Wraith Stealth. What I ordered as a replacement, and I'm going to return the Wraith Stealth to Amazon if this works out, but I think it will, is I found Thermaltake has a AM4 cooler. They don't advertise it for AM5, but AM4 coolers fit AM5. It's all the same. That is very similar in design to the AMD Wraith Spire, which used to be a stock cooler that they included. I don't see them these days. You don't really see many. It's kind of hard to find an AMD cooler that isn't a Wraith Stealth. The Wraith Spire, or not the Wraith Spire, the Wraith Prism, which is like an RGB cooler, is on Amazon, and they're like $50 for an AMD stock cooler. It's like, shut up. So the Wraith Stealth at $7 is a bargain, because it really does work well for a lot of CPUs, but for, I guess, these Ryzen 7000 chips I was reading, they all seem to run hotter, and yeah, it's not enough. So this Thermaltake Gravity, which seems to be a clone, or otherwise is very similar to the AMD Wraith Spire, it looks like the heatsink is about twice as tall as the Wraith Stealth, so I'm hoping that that's enough. It also claims that it's designed for 95 watt TDP CPUs, which would be a step above the 7600 or the 7500F or the 8400F. So I'm thinking, that should give me enough headroom. I think, and in which case it'll still be a blowdown cooler that's cooling the VRM, and so the VRM should still be okay. And this will hopefully be a good combo. And so it seems to me like this would be the cheapest, you could go at that point. Because I was thinking of putting on VRM heat sinks, but, they stick on with thermal tape, and, the more I was reading, nobody's had this happen because not a lot of people do this, but it's like, well, theoretically, that glue could heat up, and the heat sinks could fall off and maybe, land somewhere while the CPU is running and short circuit something, and it's like, I don't really want to think about that. Either buy a board with VRM heat sinks already installed, or just deal with trying to keep the VRM cool if there are no heat sinks, So I'm thinking that this slightly bigger, still kind of crappy solid aluminum CPU cooler. I do have better CPU coolers. It's just I don't have any that blow down, and so that's why I went with the AMD stock cooler. Most decent CPU coolers are tower coolers. I could pull my tower cooler out of my old computer. I know that was drawing a lot more power than the 7500F, and it would absolutely be more than sufficient to cool it. but then no air is going to be hitting the VRM, and I would be concerned about that. I don't want I don't want it getting up, those the VRM getting up to 90 degrees. And granted, they wouldn't stay there sustained because I would not be running, Cinebench maxed out at 90 watts. I don't think that even in Cinebench, I would doubt if this CPU would be drawing 90 watts consistently, if you kept it cool enough. At least not at stock settings. Remember, I'm not doing any overclocking. Definitely do not buy this board if you're interested in overclocking. Just don't do it. Actually, if you're overclocking and undervolting, okay, yes, because you probably can get more power. You can probably get higher clock speeds and without drawing more power. In fact, I thought about just undervolting, without overclocking, just undervolting to try and save power as a solution. But I really just want to leave things at stock settings. So that's pretty much all I've been doing for the last 2 weeks, was researching PC parts, waiting on this CPU, because that was the first thing I ordered, was the 7500F, because I knew if I needed a new motherboard, that's what I was going to do. So spent the rest of the time researching, okay, which motherboard, what coolers, what power supply. Got a decent deal on a power supply, I think, too. It's a lot more expensive than I wanted to spend. I spent like $90 on it, but it was good for the money, even though I could have gotten away with a cheaper power supply. But when I've got a GPU that's very power hungry, it doesn't hurt to have more headroom. I'm sure that most people, will have clicked off by now. But if you were interested in any of this, I appreciate it. And because, ultimately this channel exists just for me to vent my frustration with the world. I'm so sad that I've been, missing the Nick Rekieta stuff. Would have been fun to talk about that. I guess there's still plenty more to talk about in the future, but we also have a presidential debate coming up. That's going to be enlightening. So I think I'll end it off here for today and get this uploaded. I guess I'll say thank you, folks, for being patient. If there's any of you who have stuck around through the last couple of weeks, I've never gone that long just dead with no uploads. I did do a community post saying that my PC was dead, so maybe somebody saw that. So anyway, with that said, I will see you folks back here in the next one.